Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Attorney General Barr, has the president or anyone at the White House ever asked or suggested that you open an investigation of anyone?
I wouldn't.
Yes or no?
Could you repeat that question?
We've got to get the Attorney General to act.
The president or anybody else.
Seems you would remember something like that and be able to tell us.
Yeah, but I'm trying to grapple with the word suggest.
And he's got to act fast. He's got to appoint somebody.
They have not asked me to open an investigation, but...
Perhaps they've suggested.
This is major corruption, and this has to be known about before the election.
I don't know. I wouldn't say suggest.
Hinted?
I don't know.
Inferred? You don't know. Okay.
This has to be done early. So the Attorney General has to act.
Senator Harris, now the Democratic vice presidential nominee, finally gets an answer to a question she asked the Attorney General more than a year ago.
You know...
better late than never.
You know, Willie, I'm surrounded. Most of the people that I see every day are voting for Donald Trump. Most of the friends I grew up with are voting for Donald Trump. And it's good talking to them and just saying, so why are you voting for this man? Oh, well, he's a terrible guy. He's a horrible example for my kids. I'd never invite him over to the house. He's despicable. I hate him. I just hate him. But, and then fill in the blank, AOC, or Nancy Pelosi, or Bernie Sanders, or regulations, or tax cuts, or 401ks. And I said, so well, we have right now a president of the United States who is demanding that his attorney general arrest the vice president, former vice president of the United States, his chief political competitor. This is something that happened in the former Soviet Union. This is something that happens still in Russia. This is not what soft totalitarian looks like. This is what a full-blown autocracy looks like, at least if you just focus on the actions of the President of the United States. And you're telling me you're more concerned about Nancy Pelosi as outside of the White House than you are an autocrat inside of the White House? It's really, there's the justifications from, again, my friends, are extraordinary, but this is just one of 100 examples that we could cite that shows just this massive disconnect between what are actions that the president's taking that are un-American and the justification for voting for this man who is trying to arrest his political rivals on the eve of what he believes to be an election defeat.
Part of the challenge of the Trump years has been that there are so many outrageous claims and there are so many outrageous statements from the president that it's hard to stop sometimes and look one in the eye before the next one comes. But as you say, right now, the President of the United States, less than 2 weeks ahead of the election, is calling for the Attorney General of the United States to launch an investigation that I think he somehow thinks will be resolved before the end election day in some way, or at least just to muddy the waters before election day. And he goes farther than that at his rallies, calling for Joe Biden to be locked up. You get the sense if he could, he would direct Attorney General Barr to just throw Joe Biden into prison and be on with it. But this is a man, Donald Trump, who is desperate. This is a man who's looking at the polls. This is a man who's spending his days calling for Joe Biden to be locked up, attacking a 60 Minutes interviewer, attacking debate moderators, anything he can do to change the conversation from coronavirus, which is what will decide this election, perhaps to his peril.
Right.
Yeah, but I'm just wondering, Mika, so if somebody says, well, Donald Trump will probably be better for my 401k than Joe Biden, even though Moody's and others on Wall Street suggest that's really not the case because we'll have stability in the White House. We'll have stability in the markets. We'll have stability in trade negotiations. We'll have stability across the globe. But even if they make that argument, so, the 401k maybe went down 20% this year, are they saying that electing a president who's trying to arrest his political opponent in America 2 weeks before an election, are they saying that maybe they'd lose 25% of their 401k under Biden, but 20% under Trump, and that 5% is worth throwing away American democracy on a guy who claims to have unlimited powers because of Article 2, a guy that questions the federal judiciary's independence, and a guy who is trying the best he can to have his political opponent arrested 2 weeks before a free election. And let me remind you all, my friends and loved ones, in the United States of America, not in Belarus, not in Hungary, not in Russia, in the United States of America. What is worth that? I've heard also, Mika, this other excuse. The press is liberal. So, okay, so you're voting for a guy who's trying to arrest his political opponent because you don't like what Don Lemon says on CNN. You want to appoint a man who says he has unlimited powers and can do whatever he wants to do, and calls for the arrests of journalists who question him, like Jeff Mason, and also, well, like me, repeatedly. You're going to vote for him because Lawrence O'Donnell makes you mad? Because you don't like the New York Times? It really, there is no logic to it. This is you desperately trying to justify something that you know can't really rationally be justified. I haven't even gotten to the racism, to the Muslim registry, to the president calling Hispanics breeders. I haven't even gotten to that. I haven't even gotten to Charlottesville, to the president telling white supremacists to, quote, stand by, to the president talking about assassinating his political rivals with Second Amendment solutions to stop them from appointing judges to the Supreme Court. Haven't even gotten through 4 or 5 years of violent rhetoric. I haven't even talked about the President of the United States saying that he would not guarantee, repeatedly in debates, the peaceful transfer of power. He did eventually, after the 5th or 6th time.
Not really.
But yeah, it's always sort of, oh yeah, sure, I'll guarantee that. There. But what about Antifa? What about this? What about that? And so I haven't even talked about all of those things. And you add it up. This is a man, and you know this, would be an autocrat if he could.
Well,
would be a dictator if he could. You know that. You said that to me. Many of you have said you know that if he loses, he can't leave America because our government would be afraid that he would sell state secrets, our most classified secrets, to other countries. Some of you tell me you think he's going to end up in jail, but you're going to vote for him anyway. I'm Tom Hanks in Big. I don't get it. I don't get it.
Well,
I don't get it. You're my best friends. You're my family members. And you're going to believe garbage that you read on Facebook.
they don't even care that
You still
he accused you of murder
11
tried
times.
to get you investigated.
You still are telling me, even though I've told you repeatedly it's a lie and sent you evidence, you're still saying you may not take a vaccine next year because Anthony Fauci has a financial stake in it. That's just a lie. And I love you, but you have to be really, really stupid or willfully ignorant if you still believe that lie, because it's not the truth. You just send Facebook posts to each other that exacerbate these lies.
It is Wednesday, the 21st of October of 2020, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Will no one rid us of these meddlesome priests? And I'll tell you, the meddlesome priests will be, ridded of if they don't wear masks. There's a bit of criticism being pointed at the Pope for going to his maskless ways. Come on, don't do it. Don't do that. But put on the mask. Lead by example. And all you priests out there, hey, look, you want to keep breathing? Well, wear a mask. Okay, it's just good advice. It really is. So that's not even the biggest news out there in news world today. And I guess one news story that might be topping the peak is the Chinese bank story. Trump having a bank account in China. It's not really shocking. I mean, we already know that he pays more taxes to foreign governments than he pays to the United States. That's how much he cares. But he did not file it. He's hiding the bank account. Now, he could claim he did not know that the Chinese bank account was Chinese because it was written in Chinese. He doesn't read Chinese. He had no idea. You get these statements and there'd be, some Chinese characters there. And I'm not talking about, Mulan. I'm not talking about Mulan. And I'm not talking about Mulan, though he would probably hate her anyway. Ooh, she's so aggressive. All women are aggressive. Well, which brings to mind, I wonder what the questions were that he was being asked by Leslie Stahl when he stormed out. And then he says he's going to release the 60 Minutes tape before it's aired. How does he have a 60 Minutes tape? Was his propaganda shop there filming while it was going on so that they could make their own little propaganda video to show how evil, corrupt, and enemy of the people the press are, Leslie Stahl, and he's hammering her for not wearing a mask. Okay. He's the one that takes off his mask and says, hey, everybody's, catch this virus. We need herd mentality. Well, you got the herd mentality with your people, fella. The herd immunity, yeah. Well, I wonder what questions were being asked. Was it about COVID? Was it about the Chinese bank account? I wonder what it could have been. We'll find out. And it is a little surprising, maybe, that Trump is just so intimidated by a big, strong, hulked-up woman like Leslie Stahl. I mean, he's a 74-year-old man suffering from COVID. He's so be gentle. Melania has a persistent cough and is not making any appearances today. She had scheduled appearances today, and she's not going to go do it because, as she said, out of an abundance of caution, I think she's rather sick. I don't mean from being a racist birther biatch. That's sick enough. But I mean really sick. That might be by design, too, and I don't mean on Melania's part, but, Trump is intent on infecting as many people as possible, and maybe he wants them dead. Somebody in the White House told him, if more people get registered to vote and more people vote, they tend to vote Democrat. And then the virus came, and he said, hey, millions of people dying? That's less people voting. It is. So I think that there's some sort of weird strategy here in the addled, propecia brain of this guy, that his election chances are greater with the more people who are dead, because more people dead means less people voting. Less people voting means more people vote for the Republicans. And if Republicans get caught up in this carnage, well, that's just collateral damage, and they'll erect a monument to the tomb of the unknown Republican voter. They'll be idolized. Indeed. Well, that's a lot of speculation on my part, isn't it? Especially when we actually have button-down news stories that we like to get into that we call the curated part of this show, because this is definitely not the curated part. Indeed. What else is out there happening in the world? Well, so much. I mean, we've got, here's a big one that I thought that I would put as part of the curated part of the show, but it was just a bit too long of a read. The Associated Press did a very exhaustive and comprehensive study about those protesters who have been arrested at, these Antifa cities, anarchist Antifa cities that Trump wants to defund. Let's see how that works. You defund the police, I defund your city. Okay, that's unconstitutional, but what does he know about the Constitution? And would he even care? Obviously not. He hasn't so far. Well, the Associated Press did this exhaustive study because Trump keeps on saying there's all these outside Antifa agitators coming in, and I've got to save these cities from these outside Antifa agitators burning down these cities because the Democrats running these cities don't know how to do it. So, Bill Barr has identified anarchist jurisdictions and is taking the appropriate measures to make sure that those anarchist jurisdictions suffer. Yeah. So the Associated Press said, we keep hearing about these leftist Antifa agitators coming in and burning down these cities. Let's go take a look. Well, one thing they found out about the burning down of the cities, there's no cities being burned down. At most, there's a block to a block and a half around a federal courthouse, as evidenced in Portland. Portland's not burning down. Even that 1.5 block around the courthouse isn't being burned down. That's just a cordon that the police have set up. Because the actual demonstrations take place pretty much in the park right there at the courthouse in Portland. And even then, it's not burning down. There has been gross amounts of violence, I will say. Lots of violence. And where has the violence been happening? Well, they looked at arrests. And it turns out that, most of those arrested at these protests are not leftist radicals. They don't belong to any group. 90-some% of them actually are residents that live within blocks of where the protest is. They're the people that Trump says he's got to go in and save them from themselves, apparently. But who has been the most, in terms of not raw numbers, but raw numbers and, the whole survey, who has been perpetuating the violence and who has been getting arrested that are, outside agitators and whatnot? Yeah. Right-wing boogaloo boys, proud boys, right-wing agitators who belong to groups and in some cases don't. But they don't come from the jurisdictions that Barr has determined are anarchist jurisdictions that need to be made to suffer. And what better way to make them suffer than to encourage your brown shirts to go in there and wreak some havoc. There we go. Wreak some havoc. Okay. And that's been happening. And the AP is on it. And I will attempt to put a link into the show notes and links diary today so that you can get to that story. But it's out of the Associated Press. So, well, because they did the survey, but the news could be all over. We better get right into now these offerings that we have curated for you today. And at the top, that was Morning Joe and his gal. Yeah, they're betrothed now. Well, yeah. Anyway, they broke down this charge that Trump is leveling against Joe and Hunter and demanding that Barr investigate them. For what? We don't know. They're opponents of Trump, so therefore they have to be investigated and thrown in jail. I mean, everybody knows that. Constitution is just a goddamn piece of paper now, isn't it? It is. Actually, it's parchment, if you want to be exact. On the rest of the menu, older workers face higher unemployment amid the pandemic. Yeah. 55 to 65 and older folks get fired first, for longer, and they don't get hired back. Why would you want them? They're old. San Francisco officials passed legislation to allow the victims of racist 911 Karen calls to sue the caller. Well, it's about time. And a North Carolina insurance magnate, who is also a prolific GOP donor, has started serving a federal prison sentence for corruption-related convictions. Not charges, convictions. That's how you go to jail. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where a prominent European Jewish group condemned a Munich auction house selling Hitler's handwritten speech notes. Why? Well, I guess there's money to be made, eh? And over 60 art exhibits were damaged at scores of Berlin museums, with the motive still a mystery. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Homepage at netrootsradio.com. You will notice our chat room link. Yeah, it's right there by the social media scroll. And the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the leftish of the chat room link that just happens to be near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to our Patreon page. And with a recurring pledge to Netroots Radio, say how about the cost of an espresso-type coffee drink? If you could send that to us once a month, that allows us to pay our bills, fly under the radar. And I got to tell you, they got some pretty good radar out there. and then we continue resisting as the founders originally intended. So thank you for allowing us to fulfill our civic duty. We need more of you. That's right. I'm sorry to confess, but it's true. And as we get to the end of the year, we are under the gun, so to speak, and we need to get the newish machinery to take over the workhorses that have been working like horses for so long, and then all the attendant software, because lots of these machines don't come bundled. Nope, they don't. Anyway, big-time expenditure coming up here as we've been making smaller expenditures to prep ourselves, and but we're under the gun because in December, all sorts of things happen in December. Windows 7, which I got to tell you, that's how old this machine is, the PC that I run. Now, the broadcaster is an old MacBook, and it has battery expansion, if you know anything about that. Kind of dangerous, too. Anyway, we need to replace them. And so there. They've been working like workhorses, and we're going to get some new workhorses to take over. And Windows 7 stops being supported in December. So does Flash. Wow, remember Flash? Yeah, everybody lived on Flash. Not anymore. Bye, Adobe. Bye-bye. Anyway, the generosity of those who have been so generous over all this time has really, really taken the stress level down. And, of course, as I stipulated, we need more of you. So if you're able, and I know it's the election season, and, make those expenditures towards candidates that are more and better Democrats that we need to put in office. But when you can, if you could slip a espresso-type coffee drink, the cost of that to us once a month, well, you'll not only be doing God's work, because there is a separation between church and state here. There is. But you'll also, allow us to fulfill our civic duty and maybe in some emotional way yours as well. Indeed. So thank you once again for the generosity that has been expressed and may be expressed in the future. See what I did there? Okay. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, it is so simple. Do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. And Tom does a lot more than that. Yeah, voiceovers, production things for David's show and Netroots Radio. Thank you, Tom. I, of course, take care of at Justice Putnam because, hey, I'm stuck with me. Good thing, too, because I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime. Get that out there on social media. The show notes and links are very important because that's where the actual reporting is. And if you would like to follow the show on Twitter, do so at Cookbook West. And really, this is the important part now. Pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. Okay. Let's dive into this first offering here. It's out of the Associated Press. For some reason, the server at the Associated Press was getting overwhelmed, and I was afraid I wasn't going to be able to get these bookmarks up. And fortunately, the AP did do whatever they needed to do. I was wondering if they were going to get a denial of service attack, just inundated with Russian and Chinese bots for all the reportage that they're doing that's putting Trump in a bad light. Isn't it weird how these hostile foreign governments want Trump to be president? Why is that? Anyway, this first offering out of the Associated Press is by Sarah Skidmore Sell. For the first time in nearly 50 years, that's 50, older workers face higher unemployment than their mid-career counterparts. Mid-career? According to a study released by the New School University in New York City. The pandemic has wreaked havoc on unemployment for people of all ages, but researchers found that during its course, workers 55 and older lost jobs sooner, were rehired slower, and continue to face higher job losses than their counterparts ages 35 to 54. Well, it's been 73 that such a severe unemployment gap has persisted for 6 months or longer. ARP said the study bolstered concerns about the economic impact of the virus on older workers. When people over 50 lose their jobs, it typically takes them twice as long to find work as it does for younger workers. The pandemic may be something that is pushing people out of the workforce, and they may never get back in, Susan Weinstock, ARP's Vice President of Financial Resilience Programming, said. In every recession since the 70s, older workers had persistently lower unemployment rates than mid-career workers, partly because of seniority benefits. But in the current recession, older workers experienced higher unemployment rates than mid-career workers in each month since the onset of the pandemic. Janie Har of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Fed up with white people calling 911 about people of color selling water bottles, barbecuing, or otherwise going about their lives, San Francisco leaders unanimously approved hate crime legislation, giving the targets of those calls the ability to sue the caller. The Board of Supervisors voted yesterday, Tuesday, on the Caution Against Racial and Exploitive Non-Emergencies Act, also known as the Karen legislation, this with a C, of course. It's a nod to a popular meme using the name Karen with a K to describe an entitled white woman whose actions stem from her privilege, such as using police to target people of color. All 11 supervisors signed on to the legislation guaranteeing its passage, despite criticism that the name is sexist and divisive. Oh. It comes amid a national reckoning on race, sparked by the police killings of black Americans and instances where white people call for officers to investigate people of color. Anonymous worker bees at the Associated Press bring us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A North Carolina insurance magnate and prolific political donor has started serving a federal prison sentence for corruption-related convictions. Greg E. Lindbergh was taken in custody at a minimum security prison in Montgomery, Alabama. According to Scott Taylor, a spokesman for the Federal Bureau of Prisons, a judge on Monday denied a second request by Lindbergh's lawyers to delay his Tuesday, which was yesterday, reporting date. Lindbergh, age 50, was sentenced in August to more than 7 years in prison after being convicted of attempting to bribe North Carolina's insurance commissioner to secure preferential regulatory treatment for his insurance business. Lindbergh is appealing his convictions. Lindbergh had given more than $5 million to state and federal candidates and committees since 2016, favoring Republicans, but also giving a little to the Democrats. Lindbergh, the sole owner of the company, now known as Global Growth, entered prison the day after he unveiled a biographical self-help book describing what a news release called the lessons he learned from encountering adversity. Well, I guess he has plenty of time to write the sequel. Okay, let's get to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, A Dark Journey. The Devil All the Time, out now on Netflix, is the screen adaptation of the 2015 novel of the same name by Donald Ray Pollock. Both could be described as Southern, Midwestern, or maybe even Appalachian Gothic. Religion and its imagery pervade, interwoven with mental illness, violence, and depravity. It's deftly narrated throughout by the author, who was in fact born in one of the two towns where much of the action occurs, the actually real town of Knockemstiff, Ohio. There's a bit of Coen Brothers vibe here, minus the humor. We meet a character, or one of his or her relatives, or maybe a character whose storyline started in the same place, then the characters who enter their stories, and so on. Despite the narration, it is a bit confusing, though it becomes less so as the storylines converge. What stands out in this one are stellar performances across the board, meticulous 1950s set design, and dark, foreboding cinematography that seems to portend every horror. Tom Holland shows his chops in a non-Marvel role as the adult version of Arvin, the closest thing the film has to a protagonist. We get to see Bill Skarsgård without the clown suit as Willard, and in what may be the most intense portrayal, we have Robert Pattinson as the perverse preacher, the Reverend Teagarden. From the grisly opening scene, recapitulated in a scene about midway through, to a comment from Arvin at the end about the possibility of going to Vietnam, there's a literary symmetry to the proceedings. The Devil All the Time, like others of its ilk, can leave you questioning the point of it all, past lurid discovery, but exploration of our dark sides seems never to be invalid at the cinema. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Jason Goldman. In the 1800s, many rivers in the American West were diverted for irrigation or dammed for generating electricity. So rapidly expanding cities began tapping into groundwater. Add climate change into the mix, and you can see how an already arid desert can become even more parched. The banks of the Santa Cruz River in southeastern Arizona were described in 1855 as covered with poplars and willows, ash trees and plantains, oaks and walnut trees. But a century later, the river was gone.
But it was the original river of Tucson and the reason the city's here.
Ecologist Michael Bogan from the University of Arizona. 70 years after it ran dry, the city of Tucson decided to release treated wastewater back into the riverbed, around 2.8 million gallons each day. Bogan went to participate in the festivities when the valves were opened in June 2019.
And everybody was, splashing around in the water and excited to see water back in the river. And what I immediately got sidetracked with was the number of dragonflies that I was seeing.
Within a few hours, Bogan counted 7 different species of dragonflies. He even saw dragonflies and damselflies mating and laying eggs at a river that had not existed earlier that day.
And so I was like, oh my gosh, I need to study this. This is so cool that these species are coming back so fast.
Just 3 months later, Bogan's team had documented roughly the same abundance and diversity of dragonflies that they'd seen in other parts of the river that have been flowing for years. Also abundant were mayflies and caddisflies. These invertebrates are indicators of a healthy aquatic ecosystem. The results are published in the journal PeerJ.
Most important is, just add water to these ecosystems. The species will find a way to get back there if you just put water back into these systems that we've dried up. And the longer you can put water and the more water you can put in, that's great for creating, a more diverse habitat and a more greater abundance of species. But really the simple answer is just add water. That's all we have to do to restore a lot of species.
Still, this is a manufactured ecosystem. It's not as if this artificially charged river is identical to the natural one that existed a century ago.
We like to call them managed ecosystems because they do have a lot of natural aspects. These species are coming in on their own, but they rely on, in this case, the city of Tucson and Tucson Water for releasing that water. Without the city doing that, they would have nothing.
Bogan calls on urban planners and other city officials to collaborate with ecologists and biologists to maximize the beneficial effects of biodiversity while still achieving the goals of urban development. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Jason Goldman.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Mildred and Richard Loving were charged and then banished from their home state of Virginia for 25 years for violating that state's law that made being a mixed-race couple criminal. I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. It was the middle of the 20th century, and the Lovings, who had been married in Washington, D.C., were guilty of violating the state's racist Racial Integrity Act. Mildred Loving described herself as part Negro, part Indian, and her husband was white. The presiding state court judge, Leon Bazile, heartily defended the law when he declared Almighty God made the races white, black, yellow, Malay, and red and placed them on separate continents, and but for the interference with his arrangement, there would be no cause for such marriages. Mildred Loving wrote Attorney General Robert Kennedy seeking help, and Kennedy redirected the letter to the ACLU, where ACLU volunteer attorneys Bernard Cohen and Philip Hirschkopf took the Lovings case all the way to the Supreme Court. There, a unanimous court in 1967, in the now famous case of Loving versus Virginia, ruled that the freedom to marry a person of another race resides with the individual and cannot be infringed by the state. Richard Loving died in a car accident in 1975. Mildred Loving passed in 2008. And their attorney, Bernard Cohen, died at age 86 in October 2020. His contribution to equality under the law lives on. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2001. That was the day that Thomas Morris Jr. died from breathing in anthrax. A week earlier, he had been exposed to the deadly poison when an envelope containing the powdery substance was opened at the mail distribution center where he worked. Thomas Morris was a member of the American Postal Workers Union. His union brother, Joseph Cursine, died 2 days later. Both men worked at the U.S. Postal Service Brentwood Processing and Distribution Center in Washington, D.C. The poisoned letters were addressed to Senators Tom Daschle and Patrick Leahy. More postal workers at a distribution center in New Jersey also fell ill from exposure to anthrax-poisoned mail. In total, 22 people were sickened by anthrax that fall from letters addressed to politicians and news outlets. In addition to those injured, 5 people died, including a 7-month-old infant who was visiting NBC News in New York City with his mother who worked there. Coming the month After the September 11th attacks, the anthrax poisoning sent another wave of fear of terrorism throughout the United States. The Brentwood Distribution Center was closed down for decontamination until December 2003. When it reopened, the facility was renamed for the 2 fallen postal workers. The next year, Senator Joe Lieberman gave an address to the APWU. He said, quote, "The postal workers who were exposed to anthrax and still got the mail out and kept our system running. They are proud union members. I know I'll never forget that, and America won't forget that. All of you at the APWU deserve our respect and our support." One person suspected of the poisonings committed suicide, and the case was closed. No one was ever convicted of the crimes. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
I read the news today, oh boy.
It's time for Nicole Sandler's What's News from NicoleSandler.com and the Progressive Voices Network.
60,000. That's the number of new COVID-19 cases in the United States in the past day. Triple what the daily average was back in June when restrictions began to ease. It's another sign that we're nearing what experts say is a, quote, rapid acceleration of the disease. Experts say we're about 2 to 3 weeks behind whatever's happening in Europe, and right now it's pretty bad. The UK's daily coronavirus death toll tripled from Monday to Tuesday, and cities like Paris are dealing with curfews and other new restrictions. 545. That's how many children who were separated from their families by U.S. border officials in 2017 and 2018 that still haven't made contact with their parents. Shocking. But lawyers tasked with identifying and reuniting families separated under the Trump administration's so-called zero-tolerance border policy say they still haven't been able to locate the parents of at least 545 migrant children. According to an ACLU court filing, approximately 2/3 of these parents are believed to have been deported to Central America without their children, some of whom were, quote, just babies at the time of the separation. Sickening. The New York Times broke some news Tuesday night as they continue pouring through the 20 years of Trump's tax returns they obtained last month. They noticed that his business history is filled with overseas financial deals that were not disclosed in any of Trump's financial disclosure forms. And some have involved China. Actually, China is only one of 3 nations, the others Britain and Ireland, where Trump maintains a bank account. Again, the foreign accounts do not show up on Trump's public financial disclosures, where he is supposed to list personal assets because they're held under corporate names. The Chinese account is controlled by Trump International Hotels Management, LLC, which the tax records show paid $188,561 in taxes in China while pursuing licensing deals there between 2013 and 2015. And in 2016 and 2017, he paid a whopping $750 in U.S. taxes. Nice. Election officials in Florida and Alaska have contacted law enforcement after dozens of registered voters reported receiving threatening emails telling them to, quote, vote for Trump or else. At least 183 people at the University of Florida got them, and at least one voter from Arizona also reported getting one. Meanwhile, early votes are coming in by the millions. The Washington Post reporting as of early Wednesday morning, 36 million Americans have already voted nationwide. In Ohio, absentee ballots are being returned at nearly double the rate they were in 2016. Crowds in Milwaukee waited for more than 2 hours to cast their ballots on Tuesday, the first day of early voting in Wisconsin. And on Monday, a record 366,436 Floridians voted in Florida's first day of in-person early voting. Now back to Washington, where Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin say they will resume stimulus talks on Wednesday, even though they blew past Tuesday night's self-imposed deadline without a deal. Pelosi said the sides are close to resolving a key sticking point over money for coronavirus testing and contact tracing. Mitch McConnell, however, is not so keen on the idea. He warned the White House that getting behind a proposal with Democrats before the election could badly divide Senate Republicans and could derail the confirmation of Judge Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court. So this happened. The Trump administration, along with 11 states, sued Google, alleging the tech giant has stifled competition to remain the top online search engine. The suit claims Google pays billions of dollars to tech companies like Apple and Samsung to be their default browsers, often forbidding any dealings with competitors. This is the largest antitrust case against a tech company in more than 2 decades, and it follows a year-long probe by DOJ investigators into Google's position in the tech world. Stay tuned. One of the jurors in the Breonna Taylor grand jury is speaking out, saying the only charge they were presented with during the proceedings was wanton endangerment. That even though the panel asked about them, homicide laws were not explained, nor were self-defense or justification laws. In a statement, the juror said, quote, questions were asked about the additional charges, and the grand jury was told there would be none because prosecutors didn't feel they could make them stick. The grand jury didn't agree that certain actions were justified, nor did it decide the indictment should be the only charges in the case. As to what happens next, I guess we wait and see.
I'm not a baby.
Well, that's up for debate. Donald Trump abruptly ended a White House taping of a 60 Minutes interview with Leslie Stahl after 45 minutes and declined to complete a planned segment with Vice President Mike Pence on Tuesday. Trump, unhappy with Stahl's questions and asserting that his opponent gets favorable news coverage, later threatened on Twitter to release a White House tape of the interview. Please. Trump and Joe Biden meet for a second and final debate Thursday night. Still reportedly in a foul mood after the aborted 60 Minutes interview, Trump departed the White House for an evening rally in Erie, Pennsylvania, where he actually said this.
You know what? 4 or 5 months ago when we started this whole thing, because, before the plague came in, I had it made. I wasn't coming to Erie. I mean, I have to be honest. There's no way I was coming. I didn't have to. I would have called you and said, hey, Erie, if you have a chance, get out. But we had this thing won. We were so far up. We had the greatest economy ever, greatest jobs, greatest everything. And then we got hit with the plague. And I had to go back to work. Hello, Erie. May I please have your vote? Right?
Wow. What was that again?
I'm not a baby.
And that's just a bit of what's news for now. I'm Nicole Sandler. If you appreciate these reports and the Nicole Sandler Show, I hope you'll consider making a contribution. My work is 100% listener supported, and I can't do it without your help. Find out more at NicoleSandler.com, and please click on that donate button.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 52 degrees Fahrenheit, expected to be a lot cooler than yesterday, expecting only a high of 66. Partly cloudy skies most of the day with maybe a peak of sun in the afternoon. Partly cloudy overnight with lows in the low to mid-30s. We are or will be in an active freeze warning late tonight and into tomorrow, so care should be taken, and we will take care. Tomorrow we'll have intervals of clouds and sunshine with highs in the low to mid 60s. Winds will be light and variable throughout it all, except for today and tonight, when winds will be out of the north at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Pollen is rated as none here in the Rogue River mothership location. and the air quality index for the region is good at 23 parts per million. The daytime UV index is moderate at 3. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.09 inches. Visibility is at 7 miles, and relative humidity is 97%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. London is 60 degrees with light rain. Paris is 70 and partly cloudy. Rome is 70 with sun. Kyiv is 51 and fair. Kabul is 61 and fair. Hong Kong is 71 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 61 and cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 64 and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 58 degrees and fair. And New York is 64 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased, and these people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. David Rising of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A prominent European Jewish organization slammed a Munich auction house's decision to sell several of Nazi dictator Adolf Hitler's handwritten speech notes, saying yesterday, Tuesday, it defies logic, decency, and humanity to put them on the market. Rabbi Menachem Margolin, the head of the Brussels-based European Jewish Association, said the upcoming sale of the manuscripts is particularly worrisome amid recent figures showing rising anti-Semitism in Germany and could encourage neo-Nazis. I cannot get my head around the sheer irresponsibility and insensitivity in such a febrile climate of selling items such as the ramblings of the world's biggest killer of Jews to the highest bidder, he said. What auctions like this do is help legitimize Hitler enthusiasts who thrive on this sort of stuff. The speech notes being offered, all dated before World War II, are directed to Nazi party organizations and contributors at various functions and make reference to preparing Germany for war and the Jewish problem.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Gear Molson of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. More than 60 artworks and artifacts at some of Berlin's best-known museums were smeared with an oily liquid by an unknown perpetrator or perpetrators earlier this month. The authorities said today, Wednesday. They were hopeful that the apparently random damage can be prepared, but said the motive was a mystery. The works at the Museum Island Complex, a UNESCO World Heritage Site in the heart of the German capital that is one of the city's main tourist attractions, were targeted at some point between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. on the 3rd of October. Investigators said they had watched hours of surveillance camera footage but had not found any obvious sign of anyone applying the liquid. In all, 63 works at the Pergamon Museum, the Alte National Galerie, and the Neues Museum were affected, and there was no thematic link between the targeted works, and no pattern is discernible to the perpetrator's approach. The liquid was oily, but not corrosive, and the authorities would not give more specific details of the colorless fluid, citing the ongoing investigation. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we're going to meet up tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays, so do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.